Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with Odon Lafontaine, who probably needs no introduction, but just in case you don't know, he has written the book, The Great Secret of Islam, and I urge you to run out and get a copy. Uh, his links should be in the description. Otherwise, please search for The Great Secret of Islam. And today, we're here to talk about the Quranic Mushrikun. And I think I'll probably end up doing two, maybe three episodes on this. It's an interesting topic because I came across a paper by Patricia Crone, and she doesn't really come to conclusions, but she raises questions. And then I've gone through different scholarly perspectives, and this one is all over the place. And yeah, so let me leave it at that for the moment. I will bring the slides in later, but for now, Udon, welcome, and yeah, please introduce yourself. And also, what made you decide to join me today? Because I know you don't agree with everything, but hopefully we can discuss and show that there's a lot of divergence of opinion here. There's no clarity.
Hello, Lloyd. Salutations to the audience. I join you because this is a topic that is essential to the comprehension of early Islam, and it is also essential to what I try to explain in my book. My thesis is that there was a sort of a fabrication of a new narrative that imposed itself on the Quran. And because of this, we read the Quran with Islamic lenses. According to this new narrative that was forged starting from the 8th century, and the fabrication took centuries thereafter. It wasn't done until at least the 10th or 11th or maybe 12th century. According to this narrative, the Mushrikuns are supposed to be pagans, polytheist pagans, and they are essential to the milieu in which Muhammad is supposed to have received the revelation, the Jahiliyyah, the time of ignorance. But when we really look
Although
into the
more accurately, it is the condition of ignorance. I mean, it is used as the time of, but really it refers to the condition of,
it's a
because if you're
condition.
not a Muslim country and
Yeah.
you're not a Muslim, you are in the condition of jahiliyyah, of ignorance and vile paganism.
This is why I used ignorantism, which is not a proper word, but ignorantism means the condition of being ignorant. So this so-called jahiliyyah was an invention that was designed to give a starting point, a blank page as a starting point for Islam. And for this, it was very important to find pagans in its sacred texts. The thing with the Quran is that it is not at its origin 100% Islamic text. It is not an Islamic text. It is a pre-Islamic text that has been Islamicized by the fabrication of this narrative. And when we look at the text literally, for what it says literally, we can still understand that it was not about pagans, but it was about something else. And I think this will be very, very interesting to unravel in our discussion.
Okay, yeah, great. So tell you what, let me bring up my. By the way, guys, thanks all for being here. I see I've got some regulars. Tom Gyokai, you're back. Century Since, Villainous, welcome, guys. XR. So thanks all for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel so regularly. Much appreciated. Please light up the chat. And by the way, this is my third broadcast with a new channel bot. So I'm still tuning and training the bot. So my previous one was well tuned. I had it for several years. So if there are any issues, please note that it's not intentional. I just need to tune the bot. I've already made changes. So hopefully we don't have any crazy issues today. And welcome, Andrew Martin. So yeah, let's dive into this. And so the question is, let me just get rid of the text. The question is, who are the Quranic Mushrikun? So is it the case that Christians are defined as pagans, considering paganism was already rare? Yeah, and that's something to discuss. So I'm hoping to do maybe 25 pages at most today, maybe one or two more, depending how it goes. But yeah, so I want to lay out different evidence, and I want to focus mostly on Crone, but largely on Crone, and then I'll try and go through other authors as we go on other perspectives. So, Robert Hoyland says, Mushrikun, very likely a catch-all term used by Muhammad to refer to very diverse groups. So this is not a term that defines a specific group. It's like a slur that gets thrown at a wide variety of groups. And it would also seem, if some of what Odin and I have discussed and what has been discussed in the past, that if the Quran was prepared over centuries, potentially, then at one time it referred to group A, then it referred to group B at a later time and group C. And you will see there are contradictions and inconsistencies. So, a couple of side things that I'm hoping to explain are the Quran's anti-Trinitarianism. I think we can find a good basis for that to make sense of that, and also why the Quran hates Saint Paul. I think after 3 years of digging, I think I have a fairly decent thesis to explain that, to give a source, a genesis for that. So, how did the Quran and Islam come about? Right, minus the Muslim spin. It's very hard to remove the spin, but I believe we can sort of make an effort to determine what is spin, what is history. And then 2 points. We don't know for certain, but we can determine how Islam and the Quran did not come about. And I've got perspectives from Crone, Hoyland, Horting, Lafontaine, Durmaz, and others, along with my analysis and with Odon. Any thoughts, Odon?
I'm not really sure about what you call Paulianity. I know
Oh,
you.
Paulianity. Muslims always say, oh, Christians worship Paulianity. Paul
Yeah, I
corrupted,
agree.
Paul
I
hijacked
agree with this, but
Christianity.
where do we find it in the Quran? Saint Paul is not named
No, no,
in.
no, agreed. However, when you read the Islamic scholars from the between the 8th
Mhm,
and the 15th century writing about Saint
mhm.
Paul, it's hysterical. It's laughable in some cases. It's real comedy. The crazy views and opinions and historically inaccurate statements that they make. But also, I think this discussion about the Mushrikun gives us an insight into why they disagree with St. Paul. Because I think I believe I can point to a reason why this hatred of St. Paul came about. And I
I
think we
have
can find
a
the
reason
source.
also. I have a reason also. I think it's the same. Um, when Islamic
Oh, we'll
scholar.
come to that later. We can
Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
discuss
Okay.
that point later when we get to that particular slide.
Mhm.
So I've got to read 2 pages to you. And Odon, if you need to, just hold up your hand if you need me to stop so you can add a comment. All right. And I can close this because I'm streaming on Rumble, X, and YouTube simultaneously. Streams are looking healthy. So this is Robert Hoyland on Patricia Crone. In 1987, she states that the Quran is strikingly poor in reference to the environment in which it arose. What is more, the few references which it does contain are uninformative because the book merely alludes to persons, places, and events. It lacks specifics, it lacks details, where the historian would have liked it to tell a story. The one reference to Mecca gives no indication of the role that Mecca is supposed to have played in Muhammad's life. That's in Quran
Mhm.
48:24. And if you need me to go to the verse, let me know. I can do that. The one reference to Badr does not identify it as the site of a battle. She was scarcely more positive about Quranic exegetes, feeding us examples from her about to be published Meccan Trade on the diffuse and contradictory nature of their explanations of the meaning of such Quranic phrases as Ilaf Quresh of Surah 106.1. Our handout concluded the exegetes offer 15 different explanations of the historical facts to which it is supposed to refer, and it is quite clear that all 15 explanations are guesswork based on the wording of the surah, not on recollection of what Muhammad or his contemporaries understood by it when it began to be recited. Odon.
Yeah, this is exactly what Henri Lamince found in his time, 100 years before Patricia Crone. Almost. Remember, maybe I quoted a study from him where he explained that the whole Sunnah is a fabrication made to give an Islamic exegesis of the Quran. And
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
we cannot rely on the surah, on the sunnah, so the hadith and the story of Muhammad, to understand the Quran. And we have to do what Patricia Crone did, which is understanding the Quran with the only mean of the Quran or of what preceded the Quran. We cannot understand the Quran with later tradition. We might
Spoken.
understand with later tradition how the Islamic narrative was fabricated. We might understand the various reasons to change the Quran, to change the meaning, but we won't be able to understand its literal meaning. For its literal meaning to be understood, we have to have an exegete approach, which is looking at the words and looking for one specific word or expression at every occurrence of it, and trying to understand its meaning according to the Quranic text only.
Right. No, fair enough. Fair enough. So Villainous asks, if the Quran was written over centuries and the oldest document contains the seven sleepers, could Islam originally have been Trinitarian, as the sleeper story is super Trinitarian? I'll make one comment on that. In that, for instance, there are ways to interpret what the Quran says. There's the narrative, the standard narrative, which has shaped our perspective. There is the way Muslims shape the narrative and present the narrative, but there's room for interpretation. So, for instance, when it says "say not three," is the Quran saying to Trinitarians, "Say not that there are three aspects of God, that there are three persons in the Godhead," or is it saying to tritheists who claim that the three persons of the Godhead are three separate gods, which is a heresy? Is it a Christian document talking to tritheists or tritheists, or is it a monotheist Muhammad talking to Christians? You could easily say that perhaps, well, it is actually a Christian document that's saying to tritheists, no, it's not three gods. It is three in one as a trinity. So there's room to interpret it that way. So you could argue potentially that he's Christian, because this document has been sliced and diced and chopped up like crazy. It's spaghetti by now. Although I believe it is possible to unravel. If we cannot be certain or precise, I think we can certainly find certain clues that give us, we can eliminate certain things, and we can certainly say, look, it looks very much like this. What do you think, Odon?
At first, I think the Quran wasn't written over centuries. The raw material of the Quran, most of it comes from the early 7th century up to the 630s. Some might have been added later, but most of the raw material comes from this time. And besides, what we see in the Quran is a preacher. Mostly we see a preacher addressing an audience. And so when he talks about the seven sleepers, for example, he might do so in order to befriend the Christian audience, to say to them, I'm like you, we share the same cultural background. I also know the seven sleepers story like you. But the thing is, the Quran is made of bits and pieces. There are bits that are some kind of friendly towards Christians, and some other pieces that are very unfriendly to Christians. So you see there is a sort of progression within the
Yes.
Quran. At first, let's befriend the Christians, then indoctrinate them, and make them understand that the Christian faith is wrong, which could help us understand why there are some verses with very different stances towards Christian or Christianity.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you. Yeah. So let's continue with this is from Robert Hoyland, Patricia Crone, The Quranic, Pagans, and Related Matters. That paper is only 4 pages long. So if you want to find that, Robert Hoyland, Patricia Crone, The Quranic, Pagans, and Related Matters, it's only four and something. Well, 4 pages, three and something. If you want to read that, it's a really good read. And we will discuss that later. I will add some of his content like this, but the full paper later. So there matters stood until she was asked to review Gerald Horting's book on the idea of idolatry and the emergence of Islam, Cambridge, 1999, which argued that the Quranic Mushrikun were not polytheists, as was usually assumed or asserted, shall we say, by medieval and modern scholars based on the assertion by Muslim scholars, but rather monotheists who are well acquainted with monotheist vocabulary and concepts. And I think it's fair to say, Odon, right, that the Quran assumes that the audience is familiar with the language and theology.
Exactly. Exactly. I this reference from Houting is very, very interesting. Edouard Marie Galès also put it in his thesis. And but let's first read Patricia Crone's reaction.
Okay, yep. So she writes, I was shocked. It was obvious that Houting was right. The so-called Mushrikun were not the pagans depicted in the tradition. It was also obvious that I had not really read the book before. This prompted her to read and write about the Mushrikun and more generally about the religious environment that gave birth to the Quran. And that again is Robert Hoyland in this text here. Any comment before we go on, Odon?
This is my thesis, which I built upon Edouard Marie Galès' research, who also built up upon Crone's work and Houting's work. So I completely agree. The Mushrikun, when you really look into it, the Mushrikun are supposed to be, according to the Islamic narratives, are supposed to be pagans who know about the one God, because they call him Allah. Allah is the name of the one God. It might have connections with pagan deities, but mostly Allah in Arabic is the transcript of Allah in Aramaic, and it is the same word. It's a word for the one God, and it's not logical. How can a polytheist cannot know the concept of a one God? They belong to different worlds.
Right.
If you
These cannot be
know
true
the
pagans then.
Someone who acknowledges the concept of a one God cannot be a polytheist. And so we see that the mushrikun slur or slander can only apply to monotheists that are judged by other monotheists as being not monotheistic enough. This is the only situation where mushrikun makes sense.
Right,
And
I like that.
if we look into Houting's research in the idea of idolatry and the emergence of Islam, he dug into the Jewish tradition and found that in the pre-Islamic Jewish tradition, though in the making of of rabbinic Judaism, there was already an accusation of associationism towards Christians.
Just say shirk.
Yeah, let's say shirk. But there's the Hebrew word is shituf, and it's exactly the same as shirk. Right. And the Christians were accused of being unpure monotheists. They were associationists because they were from a rabbinic perspective.
So a Jewish argument, a Jewish rabbinic argument, being co-opted by the Muslims.
You see how it must come from a sort of Jewish background. Okay. Because you have to be monotheistic yourself to accuse someone else of not being monotheistic enough.
No. Okay, no, that's fine. So we have certain parallels here with your thinking, my thinking, Patricia Crone's thinking. So that's actually really good. Let's continue to the next page. So some of my original sources. I came across this book, Odon Lafontaine, very weird name, The Great Secret of Islam, Science Unveils the Origins of Islam. So I came across this book and I started reading it, and then I gee whiz, it's your name is Odon too. Good grief, I see it on the... So yeah, guys,
distant cousin or something. Mm.
So I first came across Odon's book, and his thesis is fantastic. Again, I urge you to get a copy of the book. You can get it on Amazon. I believe the link should be down below. To you can just Google the name. Otherwise, you can go to his website and you can get a copy there as PDF. And I've read it. It's fantastic. I was honored to be one of the proofreaders. I managed to offer 5 cents worth of my thoughts. And of course, the religion of the Qur'anic, pagans, God, and the lesser deities. Very interesting read. I haven't finished the whole paper. I haven't finished, but then again, I'm not going to be doing the entire paper in one episode either. But I've read a significant portion of it, and it's some fascinating ideas. Or did I finish the whole thing? I think I did read the whole thing, but I need to read it again. Okay, so moving on.
Mhm.
So, title: The Religion of the Quranic Pagans, God and the Lesser Deities. Patricia Crone. Objective: She wants to reconstruct the religion of the Quranic Mushrikun based on the Quran and earlier evidence, not later evidence. Like you said, all the later evidence, it seems to be fabricated, seems to be propaganda. Key findings: the Mushrikun recognized the same biblical God, Allah, as the messenger. Now, of course, we need to understand that Allah as the biblical God for certain values of Allah, right? So the also now there are lesser deities which are referred to as gods and angels that function similarly to saints in later religions. So these mushrikun apparently worship lesser deities. They're aware of Allah, they know about the one God, but they seem to worship other deities, and we'll discuss that as we go. Mushrikun beliefs, however, she decides, based on her research, could align with pagan monotheism, which is a syncretist approach, which is the merging of two sets of ideas. Now, let's just leave that as it is for the moment, and we'll look at these nuances as we go. But there may be some sort of pagan monotheism, and their ideas also align with Judaism, because in the Quran, these ideas are not clearly defined, and these ideas evolve and change. So this is really odd. It's a really odd contradiction. It's a very odd situation. But then again, we also see things through a Western lens and through a third world lens. That kind of makes sense to me when I think of it as an African. It's like, yeah, I can see that working. As a Westerner, you'd go, huh, that makes no sense. But in a weird kind of way, it does. But how can it be pagan and Jewish at the same time? It's like, huh? That's an odd one. But it can also be Jewish, which aligns with what Odon said earlier. These seem to be some form of rabbinic Judaism. And the Quran's vague. The definitions are unclear. Just your thoughts on that, Odon.
Um, we should add how Patricia Crone worked. I already said it. She read the Quran, and she picked every detail in the Quran about the Mushrikun, about their belief, about their doing, and she compiled everything with thematics. Do they have a pilgrimage? Do they believe in the same? What kind of God is there? One God, and so on. But there one thing that she did not look very thoroughly at, in my view, is that the Quran is not it's not an article about the Mushrikun's faith. There was no journalist here asking question, what do you believe, and so on. The Quran is something else. The Quran is made from the point of view, mostly, of someone who criticizes the Mushrikun's faith.
Mm-hmm.
So there is slander, there is exaggeration, deformation. For example, lesser deities referred to as gods. This can be seen as a critique from an outsider criticizing, for example, the Christian faith. In the Christian
Mm-hmm.
faith, there is devotion towards saints, towards holy monks, holy patriarchs, and so on, towards the
Mm-hmm.
apostles, for example, or towards Mary. And this can be criticized as being a sort of devotion to a lesser deity from the point of view of someone who is outside of the religion and wants to criticize it. So I
It's an
think in my
anti-Christian
mind,
polemic.
there is this polemic color that Patricia Crone she should have taken it much more into account, in my view.
Okay, no, don't forget, this was early days. This is like pre-internet. This was when the internet was still running, the early diesel internet, right? We now have more information, more tools. It's more acceptable to do this kind of work. We have better technology. So we are picking up I think we're picking up the baton where she and others have left off. I mean, look at the explosion
I agree,
of
but
research.
mind the date of the article, 2010. It was not the heroic times of early internet at the time.
Yeah.
I think it pertains more to the way Patricia Crone viewed herself as a scholar. Her role was to ask questions, the relevant questions, but she was not there to give all the answers.
Exactly.
She left this to us.
Yeah. Well, look at the growth of people like you and me since Jay Smith and Hatun Tash revealed that there were like 9 billion different Qurans. When Hatun Tash showed like 27 different Qurans in Speaker's Corner that day, I was like gobsmacked. And I think that was a wake-up call to a lot of us, and the internet presence of people like you and me exploded after that. So she put forward the question. I'd like to pick up from that question, basically. Yeah, let's continue. So, monotheism and resurrection are the most important religious foundations in the Quran, is what she writes here. Monotheism, their version of monotheism, and don't forget, Islam does not present Christianity in an orthodox manner. It presents Christianity according to its own specific, skewed, false interpretation. We also have to bear these things in mind. And resurrection of the body after the end times, this is something that the Quran speaks about quite extensively. Right, so now polytheists have been addressed in the Quran, like the wealthy person in Surah Kaf, or 32 to 43, as those who deny the resurrection. Now, notice suddenly you have pagans, and now you have people who deny resurrection, who deny a Christian idea as polytheists. That's a really odd. That's a really odd point, don't you think? It leaves a question. You know, that's a
we should look into the verses, because I think they are not denying the resurrection, but the day of resurrection.
Okay.
The day of judgment. I think they are denying that it will be happening soon.
We check in the Saint Murad, Surah Kaf. Which surah is that?
I think it's 16, isn't it? No, it's 18. 18. Surah 18. Surah 18, verse 32.
This is the Saint Murad translation, 32 to 43. So I'm just going to use the Saint Murad since I have it here. 32. So, and drubbed for them a likeness. 2 men were rendered to each of them 2 garden of vineyards, and preserved them both by palm trees, and rendered between them plantation. Each of the 2 gardens. Is this correct?
No, I don't think it's the accurate reference. There's nothing about the. I just read it, and there's nothing about the resurrection there.
Okay, let's have a look. Surah Kaf. Okay.
Let me just check in my database.
I'm just looking as well, because I didn't think that would be relevant, but let me find it. 18. It says 18.
Surah Al-Kahf is Surah 18. No.
So I do not presume that this will exterminate ever, and I do not presume the hour is ongoing. And had I been rebounded, unto my Lord, I will indeed find a more charitable than it as an inverted place. That sounds like Greek to me. I don't know about you, but when I read that, that just makes my brain hurt.
That's the thing, but especially in Murad's translation, it's a bit difficult, because his translation is very very blunt,
Literal.
neutral, yeah, and we as Westerners are not used to the Arabic way of thought and of
Well,
expressing ideas.
point for them a similitude, two men, unto one of whom we had assigned two gardens of grapes, and we had surrounded with date palms. Each of the gardens gave fruit, and we caused the river to gush forth. And he had fruit, and said unto his comrade, I am more than thee in wealth, and stronger in the respect of men. And he went into his garden, and he wronged himself. He said, I
Mhm.
think not that all this will ever perish. I think not that the hour will ever come, and if indeed I am brought back unto my Lord, I surely shall find better than this as a resort. So, disbelievest thou in him who created thee of dust, then of a drop
Yeah, but
of seed, and then fashioned thee a man? Yes?
there's nothing about the Mushrikun in this passage. It's not about the
Yeah.
Mushrikun. It's about the. It's a sort of parabola about the judgment.
Yeah, but he's a disbeliever, and well, let's hold that for the moment.
Okay.
Let's hold that for a moment.
Mhm.
To see, because I don't have the explicit reference she had. I mean, this is a reference found within that, but okay, let's. So for starters, let's talk about what Inara has to say. A few comments from Dr. Robert Kerr. It's the 7th century. No polytheists or pagans remain. Now, maybe there are little pockets of them here and there, so let's leave that. Let's leave that for the moment. But on the whole, at least in the Western Empire, there's no polytheists, there's no pagans, and the Quran's mushrikun are falsely translated as polytheists. Accurately, it is those who attribute partners with Allah, or those who share the attributes of Allah with others, claiming that others share those attributes
Mhm.
with Allah. Right, so that is the correct translation. So there's this effort to imply it's polytheists, which may be a misdirection to try to obscure who they actually are when the word is translated incorrectly. Let's continue. You have the Arabic sharaka, to associate, which is related to shirk. Sharaka in Arabic literally means partnership or cooperation. Shirk does not equate to polytheism. The Quran
Mhm.
uses various terms for Christians. It can't seem to make up its mind what a Christian is because it also uses Gnostic ideas. It speaks of others who are clearly not Christians. Natsara Ansar, Arabic term supposedly for evangelizing Christians, linked to the Hebrew Netzer, the branch. Your comment on
Um,
that?
yeah, two comments. Shirk, the SRK root, it's not it's not theological by essence. It's only about association. In Arabic, you say as-sharika for a partnership
Hmm.
where you work. It's a company. And also beware, there's a difference between Nasara and Ansar.
Hmm.
It's not the same S, and so it's not the same root.
Yeah,
Nasara, I think it relates to it is linked to the Hebrew Netzer, but Ansar, it's based on an Arabic verb, which means to help.
yeah, the helpers.
And
Yeah,
we don't find the same root in Nasara.
yeah. No, I just grabbed some stuff from Robert Kerr, but I just wanted to. So now distinction does exist in the Quran between different quote unquote Christian groups. Whether these groups are Christian, now that's another question. Whether they are
Mhm.
heterodox or orthodox, that we can have to struggle with later. Now, there's discussion of Jewish Christians, and of course, when you go to Hoyland, he will dispute that there are these Jewish Christians. You'll say that, well, some scholars say there were no Jewish Christians. It's a complete myth that someone made up, maybe at Disney, right? Now, according to Dr. Robert Kerr, anyway, you had Jewish Christians and you had Chalcedonian Christians who believed in the Trinity. And he states that the Mushrikun in the Quran refers to Chalcedonian Christians who accept the Trinity and under the Council of Chalcedon definition. So he says that is
Um,
what the term, yeah.
but there's just one thing. Chalcedonian Christian, it's a common expression to refer to Trinitarian Christians. but they existed way before the Council of Chalcedonia. I think it is the original Christian faith. And so there were Jewish
Yeah, it had to be
converts
defined.
to
Yeah, the
Christianity
Orthodox
who
Christian
were,
faith had to be defined in a council due to challenges from outsiders. So yeah.
yeah, and it's much more easy to refer to them as Chalcedonian because in the council we have a clear definition. But this very definition is also found in the Gospels, and so we can assume that very early Christians, most of them were Jewish. There were also Jewish Trinitarian Christians, like the apostles, for example,
Hmm.
who were all
Yes,
Jews.
yes. Yeah. Wiseman said the Sadducees deny the resurrection, which is interesting for a Jewish parallel. And
Mhm.
Villeneuve says the Sadducees only use the first 5 books, but like the Samaritans, resurrection details in the prophet section. So interesting points. So yeah, bear that in mind. There are certain Jewish parallels here for sure. Right. Let's continue.
Mhm.
He says Chalcedonian Christians are labeled Mushrikun for association with the Trinity. Now, this may well be true, might be 100% true, but there may well be other groups given the same label, right? So, this is a Quran concordance by Hannah E. Cassis. So, in my view, there's an effort to imply that the Mushrikuns are pagans or polytheists, or at least initially in the Quran. Now, this could be a misdirection to hide and obscure their religious identity. They're trying to hide a certain
Mhm.
history that they don't want revealed. Now, the above named text, this one, the concordance, defines the word and lists all of its Quranic usage and variations. So that book is in my Google archive. Download a copy. You can look for concordance
Mhm.
or cassis. And it has here the root, sharika, the act of associating, ascribing partners, a partnership. The verb, shirk, noun, shirk. And these are not the only Quran verses. It lists a couple of dozen. Okay, I didn't want to pull the whole 3 pages in here. And one who shares, an associate, a partner, and sharaka, to share, and share with them in their wealth. So it
Mhm.
also has commercial application. To make
Sharika.
someone a partner or associate. Yes, Odon?
Like I told you, a sharika, the company, a business.
Yep. Now notice it says to associate someone or something with God, to ascribe partners unto God. But notice it says to be idolatrous, which I believe is an assertion because we don't, because idolatry and polytheism is not proved in the Quran. It's assumed, it's asserted. But again, we'll
On
discuss all
this
the
very
evidence.
topic, there is something interesting. When you look at John of Damascus' writings about Islam,
Yeah.
um, he says that the sons of Ishmael were idolatrous. They worship the star of the north and so on, and he
Hmm.
calls them idolatrous. And he says they call us Christians associators, and it's not the same word. He doesn't use the same word, which means that during the time of John of Damascus, so he died around 746 or 748, something like this. The idea that the pagans were Mushrikun did not exist. It did not
Hmm.
exist yet. It was invented after him, or
Right.
maybe during his time, but he wasn't aware of it.
I have a presentation prepared on John of Damascus. It's not finished yet. It's still a little bit raw. I've done some initial work. It's not going to be long, maybe 25, 30 pages, but that's interesting and worth discussing. And you're also hinting at something that I'm going to give as a conclusion from my own analysis as we go. But thanks for that, Odon. So, the religion of the Quranic pagans. So now I'm going to give you a small introduction to her paper. Um, Abstract. In the article in 2 parts, devoted to the first step of an attempted reconstruction of the religion of the Quranic Mushrikun on the basis of the Quran and indisputable early evidence alone. The first part concludes that the Mushrikun believed in the same biblical God as the messenger. This doesn't mean they worshipped that God. They believed he existed, but we'll talk about the specifics of that as we go. And that they believed in the same biblical God as the messenger, and that their lesser beings, indiscriminately called gods and angels, functioned much like dead saints in later Islam and Christianity. This is not exactly new. It is more or less what Ibn Abd al-Wahhab concluded 300 years ago. And Wahhab is the founder of Wahhabism, right? Welcome to Saudi Arabia. The second part examines the high God hypothesis and tries to relate the beliefs of the Mushrikun to those of other monotheists. Now you see a distinction here, and a historical distinction, and tries to relate the beliefs of the Mushrikun to other monotheists in late antiquity with indeterminate results. It's very hard. So there's a fuzziness here.
Mhm.
In terms of their views on God and the lesser beings, the Mushrikun could equally well be pagan monotheists and Jews or Judaizers.
Mhm.
Very interesting points there. Your thoughts before we go on. I was planning to do 25 slides. I don't think we'll get that far today. Okay.
I strongly disagree with Patricia Krohn on this. On
Right.
the Mushrikun being Judaizers specifically, there is the word for this in the Quran. The Quran talks about Judaizers in several verses. Um, I think it's Aladina Huda, the one who Judaized.
Hmm.
And it's not used. It's not the equivalent of mushrikun. We see that they are not they are not in the same categories.
Hmm.
There are something, this is something else. I think it refers to maybe Arabs or others who became Jew, because at the time one has to remember that um, rabbinism hadn't fully developed its concept of Jewishness being transmitted only by the the mother's blood, the mother by the
Hmm.
mother.
The
And
matriarch, yeah, the matriarch's
yeah,
lineage or the
in
matrilineal.
ancient Judaism, in the Second Temple Judaism, Judaism was universal, and there were converts from all nations to Judaism.
Hmm.
One could convert to Judaism. We see this in the Acts, for example, the Act of the Apostle, where it's the famous quote about Peter's sermon during just after Pentecost.
Hmm.
During Pentecost, yeah, actually, it was during a feast, a pilgrimage in Jerusalem, where Jews from all around the world returned to attend the pilgrimage, and it is said there were Persians, Edomites, Arabs, Jews from all of this part of the world. And the narrator gives a list of countries. And so there were Arab Jews. There were, I don't know, Mesopotamian Jews. There were Egyptian Jews. There were Roman
Hmm.
Jews, not
Yeah.
ethnic Jews, but they converted and they became proselytes.
Hmm.
Proselyte is Jews from the nation. So the Judaizers are the one, I think, who converted to Judaism or to a certain movement within Judaism. They could
Yeah.
have become Nazarenes, for example.
Yeah. CQ mentions Alkacites were also known as Judaizer sects. Now that's interesting. If you
Mhm.
guys could, after the stream, please drop those in the comments so that I can remember them. I can see them and remember them and add them to my notes to research them. I have done an extensive series on the Alkacites. These were incomplete slides a couple of years ago. Look up. It's oh gosh, on a different channel. I did. Truth. It'll come to me. It's on a different channel. I did a talk on the Alkacites. I need to come back to the Alkacites. There's a
Mhm.
fascinating history there, a parallel with a Judaic sect that also parallels Islam or prefigures
Yeah.
Islam. There are many parallels between the Alkacites and Islam, and that's a very important point you raised there. Then of course Wiseman mentions Sahih Bukhari, okay, mentions Arius in a hadith. So yeah, we'll talk about that. Now let's continue. She goes on to say, Quranic evidence. It is well known that the Mushrikun with whom the Quran takes issue believed in Allah. Like the messenger, they called him Allah. Okay, so these are pagans who are monotheists who believe in Allah, but they are polytheists because they believe in lesser deities. Both sides seem fully to have accepted that they were talking of the same deity. In
Mhm.
Izutsu's words, the polytheist understanding of God or Allah was surprisingly close to the Islamic concept. Now you've got pagans who are very close to the Islamic concept. Okay, fine. The mushrikun are assumed to have been pagans, whereas the messenger explicitly identified his God as the God of Moses and Jesus.
Mhm.
So this is something of a problem. Can you see the inconsistency here? Odon.
That's the thing. The Mushrikun are not pagans. She just
Yeah.
showed it in a very
Yes.
introduction. They
Yeah.
could not
No,
have
but
been pagans.
I think she's
There's something
highlighting.
else. There is something else here at
Yeah.
play. Um, I think
Yeah, but the main thing
it
is that
relates
these
to
guys. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
it relates to a wrong appreciation of
No, she doesn't
religion.
say they are. She says assumed to have been.
Mhm.
Remember, she's
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
there's an
of
assumption here.
course.
There's an
No,
assertion.
yeah. I think she understood that they are not pagans.
Because
But
today
the
they
thing
claim they are
is,
pagans, yet these pagans are very close to the Mohammedan concept of Allah, and yet Muhammad is saying, "Hold on." So, I mean, there's an inconsistency there. There's a clash there with these ideas. So we need to reinterpret that concept.
I fully agree. There's something that is not coherent here, that is not logical within the Islamic narrative. It's not about the
Yes.
Quran, it's about the Islamic narrative.
Yeah.
Because if
Now,
you
if
read the
these
Quran, it's not clear that the Mushrikun are pagans.
correct, and that's what she starts with. I
Mhm,
think when I opened up, and the thing is that if the Mohammedan concept of God, of Allah, is very close to the Mushrikun, right? Then this means, now I'm going to be coming to my own conclusion later, but this means that these two are very similar, and they're arguing. These are two similar groups that are arguing and having a theological dispute. It's like two sects that are very similar in a way, and the one is just saying
mhm.
slanderous things about the other. While on the other hand, they're claiming that that hold on, but my God is the same as the Christian God, and we're going to say hell no.
Mhm.
So
Also bear in mind that when she writes like the messenger, they called him Allah. It doesn't mean that it is the Islamic God, that it is the
yep,
God of Islam, since Islam hasn't been invented yet.
yes. However, what if they are
Mhm,
similar? I mean, just as a matter of putting down hypotheses, right? Starting with
mhm,
putting down your hypotheses and then knocking one down as you come up with evidence and eliminating these different hypotheses and trying to see what's left, right?
mhm,
So let's continue. So she says here, why did the pagans accept this identification that their God is the God of the Christians and the Jews, yet they're the same God as Muhammad? And of course, we know there's a contradiction between the God of the Bible and the God of Islam. Why did the pagans accept this identification? She says, you do not make the biblical God acceptable to devotees of a deity such as Zeus or Odin simply by saying that the two are the same. Now, she
mhm.
goes on to talk about these pagans, but she says these are pagans of a very unusual type. So she says the implication often noted before is that his opponents had come to identify Allah with the God of the Jews and the Christians. So these pagans, but supposedly, these mushrikun identified Allah with the God of the Jews and the Christians, and that material of biblical origin was circulating among them. There's a familiarity with the biblical narrative, or at least a pseudo biblical narrative. And in short, they seem to be pagans of a very unusual type. Hold on.
She writes something very important, um, and it has to do about religion. When we talk about religion categories such as polytheism or monotheism, I think they are abstractions, because you cannot put pagan monotheism in the same category as Christian and post-Christian monotheisms. She says something very, very important here. The biblical God cannot be identified with upper deities of polytheists. It's something else. What she says here, without saying it, what she implies is that the Christianization and Judaization changed the religious landscape, and we have to think um, in an opposition between pre-Christian and post-Christian, and not polytheism and monotheism. and it's very, very important. Otherwise, you don't understand what people believe. The
Hmm.
thing with the Islamic narrative, it sort of blurs everything with this polytheism stuff, which doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
No, there's
Um,
vagueness there, but I believe there's also red herrings. I believe there's misdirection. I believe
yeah,
there's
it's a red herring.
misunderstanding.
Exactly this, because when you look at the history of the Middle East and of Europe and the whole world, you see that ancient polytheism did not survive very long when it was in a sort of competition with Christianity or even Judaism. Why
Hmm.
is it so? Because
Although
Christianity,
you can make the case that these pagans also they were syncretic and they adopted beliefs of other religions as they came across them because they started to absorb
that's the
and
same
compete.
thing.
Mm.
Should they have adopted some Christian beliefs? It means they were not pagans anymore, even though their religion might have appeared with some
I'm not saying they
pagan
became
color.
Christians, but they started to compete. They created their own messiahs. They competed
Yeah,
on the surface at
which
least.
means
Yeah.
which means they took Christian ideas.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There was a sort of transformation of the religious landscape around the first century and thereafter, when the Christian ideas spread, and they brought something that did not exist in the pagan religions, in the pagan cults, and this very something which is the idea of salvation. There was no such thing before Christianity
Right.
in the pagan cults. This very idea of salvation is very potent, and this is the reason why pagans converted to Christianity or adopted into their cults some Christian ideas, the idea of
A messiah
salvation
of some
mainly.
type. There's
Mm.
evidence for that. In my Monotheism series, I actually covered some of that. Yeah. Notice she says that the pagans of the Quran seem to accept that Allah is the God of the Jews and Christians and also to know the biblical stories
Mhm.
that Muhammad retells or alludes to. And he expected them to recognize even the barest hints. So hold on, now you've got pagans that are somehow familiar with Christian doctrine, Christian stories. And also, Andrew Martin states Quran 43:57. When the Son of Mary was presented as an example, immediately your people laughed aloud and they said, are our gods better or is he? So he says that this shows that, let me just take that away. It says that it shows that it shows he's a polytheist. But also there was something else he said. He says that this shows that they know that Jesus, in this case, is incompatible with their deities. So now you've got a contradiction going on again, which is just par for the course, I think. Just find this comment. Oh, here. His tribe already knew that Jesus was not compatible with their gods and idols. I mean, however, these could also have been inserted later to cause confusion. There could be misunderstanding, etc. So, yeah, but we have to acknowledge there are contradictions, there are confusions, none of this makes sense. But we're trying to make sense. We're just trying to find our
There's
way through
something
this.
there's something to be said here. Andrew's comment, I think, is not accurate. If you look at what Patricia Crone wrote, she wrote that the so-called pagans knew about the biblical stories, they knew about the Christian God and so on. So Muhammad did not introduce Jesus to them,
Good point.
contrary to what he wrote. They were already Christians, or they had already been Christianized. Maybe they were not Orthodox Christians going to the Mass every Sunday and so on, but they had already been Christianized. And if you look at the bigger picture, if you look at the historical studies, we know that all Arabs had been Christianized at the time of Muhammad. We have historians like Sozomenus telling us about the Christianization of the Arabs. And I've put it in my book. I found this in Robert Oiland's book, in God's Path. There was something very significant at the end of the 6th century. There was a federation of all Arab tribes that was made
Ah,
with an
sorry.
Arab king under the supervision of the Persians. And this Arab king was baptized,
Right.
which tells us something very, very strong. When the chief of all Arab tribes becomes baptized, it says that all Arab tribes are already baptized or are to be baptized or are Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the Arabs were Christians.
Yeah, that's something I've been meaning to get to. I have found some fascinating papers from this 30s, 40s, and 60s. Between the 30s and the 60s, I found some really interesting papers that have been essentially forgotten that I'd love to get back to because this. Okay, yeah. So Paul preached in Arabia before Muhammad was born. Yes, he was in Arabia, at least
I
in
don't know
Arabia
whether he
Petraea.
preached there. He
Yeah.
stayed there during 3 years to be taught, to be taught. Excuse me, to
But
be
he
taught.
was
To
present though in Arabia Petraea.
Mhm.
Um, okay, well, okay, so she goes on. The Quran has many stories of idols, but they relate to the biblical past, above all to Abraham, right? And it says here in surahs identified as Meccan, you have the institution of pilgrimage, right? And lawful to you are cattle, except those mentioned to you, but shun the impurity of idols, right? And then they speak of sacrificial stones are mentioned along with wine and divinatory arrows as impurity of Satan's making, right? So yeah, sacrificial stones. Okay, fine and well, stones. And let's continue. So let's look briefly at Cronin Guillaume. So she says this is the sum total of references to idols in non-biblical contexts in the Quran, and one would not guess from this that the Kaaba is supposed to have housed a deity called Hubal.
Mhm.
Hubal can be, well, I mean, there's probably a billion. You can translate it as he who is Baal, right? Which is
Mhm.
Baal. It's just the appellation of Baal, which is mentioned in the Bible, and Baal is not good, right? And let's continue with that. This is from Guillaume's, the Sirat Rasulallah. Quraysh had an idol by a well in the middle of the Kaaba called Hubal. Now, what is crazy is that the Sirah of Muhammad, the biographies, or properly the Gospels of Muhammad, go on and on and on and on and on about the pagan nature of the Kaaba, the pagan nature of Muhammad's parents, Muhammad's friends, Muhammad's grandfather, and he was christened, he was dedicated or consecrated to Hubal, which is okay. For instance, Abdul Muttalib denied this but was willing to submit the matter to the sacred lot. He would make two arrows for the Kaaba, two for them, two for himself. Two arrows came out of the quiver and would determine to whom the property belonged. So here you've got arrows that his own family they were indulging in divination using arrows. They were then given to the priest in charge of the divinatory arrows, which were thrown beside Hubal. Hubal was in the middle of the Kaaba, the greatest of their images. It is that referred to by Abu Sufyan ibn Harb at the Battle of Uhud when he cried, "Arise, Hubal, Allahu Hubala, make your religion victorious." There's a parallel there with Islam and Allahu Akbar. And then finally, there's dozens of references. I just grabbed three. Abdullah was Abdul Muttalib's favorite son. So this is Muhammad's grandfather. That is his father, Abdullah, slave of Allah. But of course, these are people who worship Hubal. Allah is Hubal. Hubal is Allah. Um, Hubal is Baal. Baal is in the Bible. Baal is bad, I guess. And he was the father of the apostle of Allah. And when the man took arrows to cast lots with them, Abdul Muttalib stood by Hubal praying to Allah. Your thoughts on this?
Uh, this is from the Sirah, and this is
Yep.
an example of a complete fabrication. It exemplifies what I explained in the presentation about the fabrication of the Islamic narrative. I think there were no such things as divination arrows, divinatory arrows. They are an invention based on another invention of the Islamic narrative. It pertains to the Messiah. Patricia Crone talked about the Messiah as being something from the pagan culture of the Mushrikun. whereas the Messiah, MSR in the Quranic text, it's not about a game of chance as the Islamic narrative invented it. MSR is actually the exact same root as misera, the Hebrew word misera, meaning the fruit of the vine. So wine, raisins, vinegar, and so on, juice,
Mhm.
and the forbidding of the MSR. It's not about the forbidding of a pagan custom, a game of chance with divinatory arrows. It's about the forbidding of the misera, and it refers to the Nazir rule in the book of Numbers in the Bible. Those who consecrate themselves to God renounce the MSR, renounce the misera. They will not eat the fruit of the vine, nor will they drink wine or vinegar or grape juice and so on. This is what the literal text is about. It's about consecrating oneself to God up until the Messiah comes. Because when the Messiah comes, when the messianic time will have arrived, then it will be time to consume wine again. And this is
Mhm.
what Jesus said in I don't have the exact reference in mind. He says to his apostle just before being executed that he would not drink from the fruit of the wine up until he comes a second time, up until his second coming as the Messiah.
Mhm.
So you see, the literal text of the Quran was not about pagan customs. It was about something else. It was about the announcement of the messianic times and exhortations to Christians to consecrate themselves to God, renounce wine, and so on, up until the Messiah would come.
Yeah. It's crazy though that the Sirah, the Hadiths, are filled with these references
Kubal,
to to Hubal and paganism and Muhammad worshipping Alat, Manat, and Al Uzza, naming his children after Alat, Manat, and Al
they
Uzza.
needed this. They needed to invent a pagan background to the Islamic revelation. Otherwise, it would not have been a legit revelation.
Then
People
he would have come from
would have
Christianity,
immediately understood it was a copycat, a deformation of
right?
biblical stuff.
So they had to claim with this clean slate, this tabula rasa in Mecca, in Arabia, that that this was disconnected from everywhere, and there was paganism here, and then Muhammad got revelation and left paganism behind.
That's the thing. That's the thing, and this is why they invented thousands of stories about Muhammad telling that Abraham and Ishmael did not commit in the game of chance, for example. It's complete fabrication designed
Hmm.
to give a basis to the future Sirah.
Yeah, and these pagans are very Jewish Christian pagans, which is kind of weird. So
Yeah,
there's merit to that
yeah,
thesis. There's
yeah.
merit. Yeah. So synopsis, right? So brief synopsis. She reconstructs the religion, right? Key findings: the Mushrikun recognize the same biblical God, Allah as the messenger. The lesser deities function similarly to saints. The Mushrikun beliefs could align with both pagan monotheists, which is itself a kind of a contradiction in terms, and with Judaism, which tells you there's something weird going on here that needs a closer look, right? And then she looks at the high God hypothesis and late antiquity monotheism. Now we can see there are inconsistencies in the Mushrikun's belief in a single sovereign God while venerating lesser deities. And now, what does this imply for the standard Islamic narrative? Because you've got, as someone mentioned, you've got two strands. One is supposedly pagan, but it's clearly not properly pagan. There's pagan monotheism, which is weird. And then you've got this Jewish influence, which is unexpected. So, which is it? Right. So, I'm just going to jump ahead to another thing. I want to, slide 11, I'm going to jump ahead to slide 29. I just want to bring up something that is common to Gnosticism, and that is something called henotheism. Now, I'm not going to make any definitive statement here. I'm not. I just want to introduce an idea, bear it in mind, and see how
Mhm.
these parallels and things relate. So there are 8 concepts that are common across Gnostic groups, and not always universal, but they are common beliefs within Gnosticism. The first is that the Gnostic idea of God is a hierarchical henotheism, and the creator God is called the demiurge. You would know him as Yahweh, Iyal de Ba'oth, and he was the darkest God. He had no light left, and he was evil, and he created matter, which is the ultimate expression of evil. So Gnostics believe that there are many gods in the universe, but they only owe allegiance or worship to one of them. That allegiance is never to the creator God, the demiurge. Within the pantheon, all the Gnostic gods are fundamentally equal except for the amount of light they contain. They do not owe allegiance to Albert or the monad. We suspect his name may have been Cecil, but we can never really know about the Gnostic monad, which has the most light. Gnostics can pledge allegiance to eons that specialize in wisdom, truth, light, and repentance. You
Mhm.
would think of these as these lesser gods in the high God thesis, right? Or personalities such as Messiah, Christ, Jesus, Yahweh, and Adonai. Now, while the Gnostics did use these terms, they didn't necessarily use them remotely the way Christians do, right? And you will see Gnostics will use terms, atheists use it as well, saying love and light. These are Gnostic concepts which try to parallel the concept of Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit, but removing those overtones from it. This conflicts with Judeo Christian monotheism, and there may be a parallel here. And any thought before I go back to the original slide? Because we'll come back to this in the future.
Um, there's something interesting about Arabia. Since it was situated on the fringes of the Roman Empire, it became a refuge for many heretics and many cults and many Gnostics movements. So it was a sort of soup. There was a Christianization of the Arabs, but there were also lots of Gnostic movements, Messianic movements, Jewish movements, and so on. And so it's not that extraordinary to find some Gnostic color in the Quran. For example,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of Jesus not having been crucified is first to be found in some Gnostic movements like the Valentinians, I think, or the Apocalypse of Peter, a
Mm-hmm.
Gnostic text from that has been found in Nag Hammadi in Egypt.
And Hamadi is the diminutive of Muhammad, Nag Muhammad.
Nag Muhammad, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, there is something, but also bear in mind that all those there might have been some Gnostic movement before Christianity, but they strongly developed after Christianity
Third and fourth
based
century.
on Christian ideas, the idea of
Yes,
salvation.
correct.
And so they were sort of connected or related to Christianity. They were not
Correct.
pagans. The
Correct.
Gnostics were not pagans. Hmm.
Yeah. There's a, it depends on me how we define paganism. By the way, there's an interesting paper. I should really cover this on my channel. I have in the past. I will do it again. Arabia Heresium Ferax. Now remember, we always speak of there was Arabia Deserta, which is the desert area, as the Romans called it, Arabia Petrea for
Mhm.
Petra, and Arabia Felix or Happy Arabia or whatever, Southern
Mhm.
Arabia, which often also refers to Yemen, right? Which is lush and green and so on. And then there's this term, Arabia Heresium Ferax, Arabia bearer of heresies, 3 major areas within that region. Once Christianity became entrenched in Rome, the heretics left, the Gnostics left, all of these weird guys left. They ended up in Alexandria in Egypt. They ended up in Haran in
Mhm.
Turkey, Syria border, and they ended up in Najran in a place called Saudi Arabia, which is where Mecca is in that rough region. And they ended up there. So, schismatic Christianity's potential influence on Muhammad and the Quran. There's a couple of interesting papers that raise some great questions. So, I'll take that away for now and I'll go back. I just want to throw that in there. Just bear that in mind. I'm not making any statement, but understand there are parallels here, and I don't want to dismiss them casually, right? So, conclusion: the Mushrikun blended monotheistic and polytheistic elements, and their classification in the Quran incorrectly presents their beliefs or represents their beliefs. So they may have been syncretistic. In other words, they were blending ideas. They're not really compatible, but that's what third worlders do. They aren't necessarily rational. And there's also the issue of misrepresentation and misdirection within the Quran, right?
Mhm.
And now, this also contradicts traditional Islamic categorization of them as mere polytheists, or the assertion that they are just regular pagans. Clearly, they are not. As Odon, I think, very correctly and very insightfully said, they were creating a narrative to create this pagan, this deeply pagan influence, and then Muhammad got a revelation and came out of paganism to separate it from the fact that it's a copycat of Christianity. So this is, I think this makes sense. Your thought on my conclusion here, Odon?
I think one thing is missing, and it's also missing from Krohn's paper, is Christianity. What about Mushrikun being Christians?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I've mentioned that
having
already. I
some
did refer to that
Christian
already.
beliefs?
As yeah,
And that's the thing that's really
true,
missing from.
true. It is missing. You're right. You're right. That's why I mentioned it earlier. But good catch. Good catch.
Besides that, there's something else. When you look at the Quran as a whole, this is what my presentation will be about. The one I started with you about the different kinds of people, the categories of people in the Quran. You see, the Quran is about the believers, the Muslimun. It's about
Mhm.
the Jews. It's about the Christians, insofar as they are called Nasaras, but Nasaras are Jews actually, and it's about pagans, Mushrikuns, and
Yeah.
and otherwise there's only one mention, only one in the whole Quran of the Al-Injil, people of the Gospel, who
Right.
I think are Christians. So it means
Yep.
that there is a huge void in the Quran. Why doesn't the Quran speak about the Christians and
That's a
Christianity?
good point. Good point. I take that. Yes. Here's an interesting point from ORA text. They incorporate occult pagan thinking through Hermetic thinking, and this is there certainly is a Hermetic strand. I mean, as to when exactly it developed, we can discuss, but there is a Hermetic strand, at least within Islamic scholarship going back centuries. Yes, that much is clear. So they could be described as monotheistic pagans, creating Albert as the one true God, granted the monad, allowing lesser gods below him, which was the structure within the Gnostic pantheon. And there seems to be a potential parallel with the Gnostic pantheon, with their own Arabic flavors put on top of it to separate it, to create separation, to create the distinction. But there's a certain level of creativity, fiction, and parallel with historical fact. And
It seems
I think the
very
charm is sorry.
complicated. Um, you have to apply Occam's razor paradigm.
Mhm.
Usually, the simplest the simplest explanation is the better one. There is something.
Sometimes people want to deceive you to finding the simplest explanation. Ah, the sin is
I
true.
agree,
So
agree.
we
But
all have,
if you look at the Quran with the idea that the Mushrikuns are mostly Christian, it's everything makes sense. And when you look into it, there are very, very few passages that could hint at a pagan background. There is this story about the three Arab deities, Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. So the infamous satanic verses.
yeah, yeah.
There is something about the custom of burying alive little girls, and there is something about the game of chance and the divinatory arrows. Also, there is also something about giving offerings to partners of God. But when you look at all of these four objections, every one can be understood and lifted, and it leaves us with the thesis that Mushrikun are Christians, or they
Right.
are
Remember,
they are
Robert
not
Schuller said
fully
these are
Orthodox
Christians.
Christians.
Yeah.
They have kept some pagan culture. They have kept some pagan customs. But this was the same with every freshly Christianized pagan group. I see it here in France when the Gauls were evangelized. They kept pagan customs. They kept on worshipping holy sources, holy places, except they were Christianized. It was not the source of the Gaulish deity Belenos or Totates. It became the source of I don't know, Saint Martial or Saint Peter.
Right. I
This
just want to
is the
respond. Go on, please. Please finish your thought.
no. This is the way Christianity spread in within pagan people. It incorporated within, and
Yeah.
it built upon their previous cults and their previous customs.
Right.
So some of them might have
That's
remained.
Gnostic
And what
symbolism.
we
That's
see in the
Gnostic.
Quran is that the preacher who speaks in the Quran, he is addressing and mocking the pagan color of the Christian face of his audience.
Yes.
This is
Yeah. He's
what the
painting
Satanic
Christianity
verses
as
are
pagan.
about.
Yeah. No, very
Mm.
good. Yeah. I just want to respond to this person, Jeffrey Molokai. What you guys are failing to understand is there's an evil influence on this particular religion. In other words, Islam is pure, but these Europeans came, these white people came along and made Islam bad. That comes from Europe, and it's the secret societies of Europe, such as the Freemasons and the Illuminati. I'm going to say bullshit. Oh, sorry. Oh, bullshit. Sorry. Gee whiz, bad cough there. So this is from the Muslims. Now, Jeffrey, you need to understand, you need to go back over a great deal of my analysis previously done. Look at my KKK video, right? Just look for that. You'll find it. The Muslims claim that they founded the Freemasons hundreds of years before the Freemasons became a public source, a known public entity in Europe. They claim fully to be the original Freemasons. The Sufis claim they are the first Freemasons. Now, notice this here is Al-Ghazali. He is the greatest scholar of Islam after Muhammad himself. He is known as the Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. And he writes here of those who stop short of complete illumination are the idiots who don't become Muslims. And you see, because he writes here, darn it, he says, because you see, we the Muslims, we are the perfect Illuminati. You see, the Muslims are the perfect Illuminati. Now, you're talking of 17th, 18th century versus these guys who are talking in the 9th and 10th century about being the Illuminati. So, yeah, you've got your facts backwards. Try again. So, yeah, just so you know, the Muslims are really serious about all of their Gnostic nonsense and being the Illuminati and being the original blah, blah, blah. But that's a story for another time. So, let's continue with our back to the regular show. Moving on. So I'll do. We've got pretty time for like two more slides, maybe Odon, and we can pick it up again later. I mean, how are you finding this, Odon? I mean, what does this make sense? Are these presenting the issues and having us discuss these issues?
Now, our discussions makes a lot of sense. What, in my opinion, doesn't make sense is omitting Christianity.
Good catch. Good
And
catch.
this is something that I don't understand in Patricia Crone's article. And the same with this high God hypothesis. I don't believe that the pagan religion could have survived Christianity. Really,
Mm.
really, because
No, the pagan religion started to absorb Christian ideas, try to parallel and copy it, and then I think eventually they couldn't beat them, so they joined them.
yeah, but the one that were successful were, for example, Hinduism. Hinduism incorporated ideas of salvation, or Buddhism. Buddhism, it's
Mm-hmm.
exactly
Mm-hmm.
this.
A
But there
reaction
is
to
no such thing
Christianity.
as an Arab pagan Christian religion that was that made sense. And this doesn't agree with the sources. The sources tell us about the Christianization of the Arabs. They tell us about the Arab bishops attending the councils. They tell us about the holy figures in Arabia. And still today there are some Arab tribes who are Christians, that are Christians, and their Christianization dates from before Islam in Jordania,
Hmm.
Bedouin
Yeah,
tribes. And it's something very, very odd for Muslims. They cannot accept this because for
we can
them,
trace
every
that back to the
Arab
fourth
must be
century already.
Mhm. Excuse me?
Now we can trace Arab Christianization to the fourth century in Arabia.
Yeah, 4th century and maybe before, because
Yeah.
as I told you, in the 1st century, there were already some Arab Jewish communities who converted to Christianity. The one that are mentioned in the book of the Acts. In Acts, I don't remember the exact reference. The sermon of Peter I was telling you about. And beside, in the ancient Christianity traditions, we have traditions of several apostles evangelizing Arabia, especially Matthew. Matthew, he went through Arabia, and from there he crossed to Ethiopia.
Hmm.
And I think he was killed in Ethiopia or in Egypt. He tried to connect with Marcus in Alexandria, but I think he didn't make it there.
Um, let me show something, a couple of things on this point. Yeah, that's a topic I'd love to speak about in the future, Odon, because yeah, there's so much new evidence coming out in archaeology. Yeah, someone mentioned it. Century Since mentioned it. But there's more and more churches like this, and we're finding not only churches. This is one church. This is a
Mm-hmm.
church in Arabia, but there are other places like this. This is in the UAE. These were buried. These are monasteries. These
Mm-hmm.
are churches that were knocked down and buried, just like the Kathisma Church in Jerusalem. These were never meant to be found. These were razed to the ground and buried. And now
Mm-hmm.
suddenly they're starting to find churches all over Arabia, which is I mean, that's across, I'm pretty sure that's across, that's in Arabia, in Jubail. I've been to Jubail a couple of times. So if I'd known there was a church there, I would have gone. But yeah, so you are finding there's more and more evidence of Christianity all over Arabia that is being uncovered. And here we've got a reference, and I've discussed this on my channel previously, and I've got videos on this. This is in Jordan. You've got the earliest reference to Jesus in Islam, in that region, sorry, and it's called Isa, which corresponds to
Mm-hmm.
Isa of the Quran, and it's here, and it's a Christian prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so just I don't want to spend a long time. I just wanted to raise this so guys, you can look that up on my channel. And let's get back to the presentation. Uh, yeah, let's finish this slide and then we can call it a night. So, the high God hypothesis. In various ancient religions, there was a supreme deity considered superior to other gods, but was not the primary object of worship. We see the same, as I mentioned before, within the Gnostic concept. This high God is a distant creator. He's transcendent, removed from everyday affairs, not a personal, immanent God, right? His worship is typically directed towards lesser deities or intermediaries. Now, that's the same as the Gnostic concept. In the context of late antiquity, this hypothesis relates to the emergence of monotheistic beliefs, particularly in the Greco Roman world. Remember, these people came, as Odon correctly said, they were kicked out of Rome, they left and they fled to places like Alexandria in Egypt, Najran, Saudi Arabia, and Haran in Turkey, where many pagan and Turkey-Syria border, where many pagan traditions began to identify their gods as manifestations of a singular, ultimate divine being. So, in some cases, you'd have a god called Wad, love. You'd have a god
Mm-hmm.
called, I don't know, the water bearer. Now, when you walk, a couple of things. These could be separate, totally distinct, completely different beings. Or when you walk down the church, you walk down the street at home, you see you see a church, the Redeemer, you see the Lamb, you see, the Church of the Sepulchre, and you go like, wow, three different gods at these churches. No, it's three characteristics of the same deity, three names for the same deity. So sometimes it's exactly the same deity. So for instance, those 360 deities at the Kaaba could be manifestations of the same one God, but these are accessible manifestations. So they're not necessarily 360 separate gods, there could be 360 aspects of the God. Your thoughts on that while I'm at this, Odon?
Um, we have a sort of distorted vision of polytheism and ancient religions due to the influence of Greek mythology and Roman mythology on Western culture. We have to bear in mind that the Greek pagan religion was decadent already. In ancient religions, we almost see everywhere a system with a triad of gods, three
Mm-hmm.
gods, a father, a mother, and a son. If you look at ancient Egypt, this is what it was about. They might have had hundreds of gods, but in their sanctuaries, they always worshipped a fatherly figure, a motherly figure, and a sonly figure. And this is why I'm not comfortable with this idea of a high god hypothesis. It seems to
Mm-hmm.
me to be far too distant from what paganism was like. Paganism was much more simple than what we are used to when we look at the ancient Greece
Mm-hmm.
or the Roman pantheon. Um, it was much more simpler with this triad concept of a father, a mother, and a son.
Mm-hmm.
And you see how easy it was for the early Christians to evangelize pagans because they preach a kind of the same religion with a
Mm-hmm.
fatherly, a father, a mother. Mother is the Holy Spirit in the
Mm-hmm.
in Aramaic Christianity, and a son, Jesus, of course.
Yeah. Space Potato says there's no evidence of 360 gods, and that's a later addition. That comes from external sources, not the Quran itself. The Quran doesn't mention that. So again, that's one of those assertions that we've taken on board as supposedly true because that's the standard Islamic narrative.
Another
So,
fabrication.
yep.
Another fabrication to give legitimacy to the pagan background, the fake
Hmm.
pagan background of Islam.
Yeah. No, I like that. Onan, I mean, really, that's some really strong insights there. I mean, really, it's really puts things in perspective. So now, what you see is many pagan traditions began to identify their gods as manifestations of a singular, ultimate divine being. This reflects a shift towards a more unified understanding of divinity. Local gods were seen as subordinate to a high god, akin to the concept of a singular god in monotheistic faiths like Judaism and Christianity. The Quran addresses the beliefs of the Mushrikun or polytheists, right, associators who recognized Allah as a high God, but they venerated lesser deities. Now, it critiques, it criticizes, it insults associationism, emphasizing the oneness of God and rejecting the notion of intermediaries. And Jesus ultimately becomes one of those intermediaries as divine. So, this hypothesis is a framework for understanding the religious dynamics of the time when monotheistic ideas were emerging alongside polytheism. But then this would be pre-Islam, oddly enough. This would be 3 centuries, 2 centuries before Islam. And
Yeah,
yep.
it will be, in my opinion, pre pre Arab Christianity.
Mm,
It would date from before the time the Arabs were Christianized,
okay, okay, yeah, interesting.
and
So let's not.
some of this ancient paganism might have remained in Arab Christianity, but the Arab were Christian nonetheless.
Yeah. So I'll do one more page. I'll do one more page, guys. I'll finish on page 13. I think that's enough. Hour and a half is pretty good. So, high gods, deism and Gnosticism. But notice the parallel with the high god thesis and the monadic thesis of Gnosticism with Albert. And then, of course, he emanates a pantheon and then they emanate, and then you get these lesser and lesser beings and so on, right? So, deism. So, Deists believe in a creator who does not intervene in the universe after its creation. This aligns with the idea of a high God who is transcendent but removed from daily affairs. He basically ignores, he made stuff and moved on. The Gnostic monad. In Gnosticism, the monad is the ultimate ineffable, which means inexpressible, cannot be described in words, which is equivalent to Allah. He is the ultimate ineffable source of all existence, often seen as distant and beyond human comprehension. The
Mhm.
monad is not directly involved in the material world. Now, notice this is in complete contradiction or opposition to the concept of the Christian Imago Dei, that we are made in the image of God. Therefore, while we may not be able to know God fully, we can understand God in terms of his love, his justice, and other characteristics. Because we are made in his image, we have a certain understanding of God as logical, coherent, and so on. Whereas in Islam, Allah is completely unknowable, which means he's completely random and yeah, so he's not like his creation at all, which is kind of strange. So the universe is not a reflection of the mind of God or the spirit of God or the nature of God. Your thoughts before I go to the next?
Yeah, I agree that the concept of Allah within Islam, it's like he has no connection with his creation. He has no
Yeah,
interest in his creation.
yeah,
It's merely a toy for him, but he doesn't take any joy from it. So
yeah,
there's no point in there's no meaning, there's no sense. It does not give a meaning to life or a sense. It's very senseless.
yeah. No, agreed, agreed. Yeah. So thank you very much, Mary Alex. Much appreciated. Thank you. So let me finish this slide. And so intermediaries. So, in both deism and Gnostic thought, worship or reverence is often directed towards lesser deities. So, there's a parallel here, right? In Gnosticism, these intermediaries are often referred to as archons or aeons, play a role in the creation and maintenance
Mhm.
of the material world. In deism, the focus is typically on natural laws rather than personal deities. So, deism, well, I've already discussed that in my series on atheism. That's something that atheists harped on. They didn't certainly didn't believe in it, but they wanted to not have Christians follow Christianity. So they presented a pseudo Christianity. They borrowed deism and said, here's something that's similar so we can wean you off your churchly beliefs. Transcendence. Last point I'll make. All three perspectives emphasize a transcendent nature of the divine, right? That's high gods, deism, and Gnosticism. The high god in late antiquity monotheism, the deistic creator, and the Gnostic monad all exist beyond the physical realm, just like Allah. Allah doesn't enter the physical realm. And in fact, in Islam, the Sharia teaches that the physical realm is cursed. Just like in Gnosticism, they teach that the physical realm is evil. Now, you have these gods are all separated from the mundane. Notice, however, Christianity is different from these. Jesus entered the mundane. Jesus entered the mundane and incarnated as a human man. And this is something that Islam takes great exception with, because Allah does not enter into the mundane. He's a bit above it, which makes him some way a deist or a Gnostic type of deity. Last words to you, Odon. I'll finish here for the day, and we can pick this up next week or another time when you're free.
Um, let's just add another dimension to the study of religions between deism, Gnosticism, paganism, monotheism, polytheism. It's the idea of salvation. What gives salvation in all these religions? And this is what helps us to make the difference between pre-Christian religions and Christian or post-Christian religions. In the thing that matters, that really matters in all these religions, is what gives salvation. So in Christianity, it's easy. Jesus gives life, he gives salvation. In
Mhm.
Islam, Jesus does not give salvation. Jesus is not salvation. Islam as a whole, Islam as a religion, as a system, as a political system, is salvation. In Gnosticism, it's something else. In Gnosticism, the individual makes his own salvation for himself with the
Mhm.
help of his
Knowledge.
elders, his mind, the one who already know how to do it, and so on. But I think it's a very interesting key to understand religions It's the idea of salvation. What gives salvation? Who gives salvation? And there we can understand when how and why we have religion, post-Christian religion, who sort of sideline Jesus, such as Islam or Arianism, because they had a different system for salvation. It was not expressed this way. They did not talk about salvation. They did not talk about Jesus not giving salvation anymore. But it was all about this. In Arianism, Jesus is merely God's envoy with supernatural powers, divine powers, and so on. But he is not God himself, and he is not salvation. He does not give salvation, which means that salvation remains in the hands of God and of the one who speaks in his behalf. And this gives power to them. And it's kind of the same with Islam. In Islam, Jesus is not salvation. The concept of salvation is not explicit within Islam, but it's still it is there still. It exists, and it lies within the full application of Islam as a system as a whole. And so the one who command salvation are the one who command Islam. So at first the caliphs and the leaders, and thereafter the various religious and political leaders.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Odon, I mean, so Odin and I did not have a chance to discuss this except for like literally 2 minutes before we went live off camera. So I had put this together. I've been working on this. I'm still not done with it. I'm still actually refining the ideas. But so Patricia Crone, and a good catch there on a couple of things I missed. Like she doesn't discuss Christianity. She discusses Judaism. Um, and But Patricia Crone presented questions, and these are good questions. I thought the questions were worth investigating. There are different
Very
perspectives.
relevant.
Sorry?
Very, very relevant questions.
No, thank you. Yeah, I thought the questions were relevant, and I thought the evidence around this and the different perspectives. We're going to present different perspectives. We're going to look at different scholars, and some scholars disagree. Some scholars have a totally different view. And there's room for disagreement. There's room for people to also, there's also new information. There's new perspectives. And I think we are at the cutting edge. We're getting new information. We're synthesizing ideas. We have the technology that they did not even 2 years ago. And we can find things they did not. We can draw conclusions. So I think we can start to get the answers that she wasn't willing, or things she wasn't willing to conclude. Let's say I think we can lean towards greater certainty, if not ultimate certainty, and we can. What is important, we can dismiss certain things as false. And what do you think? My last question: what do you think of my parallels here with the idea of Gnosticism? Because there are parallels. I mean, I do see parallels, and
The best way to understand these parallels is to think about this very idea of salvation. How is salvation achieved in Islam, in early Islam, in Gnosticism? And this is what makes the parallel very interesting. Because the idea that there is a salvation came to Arabia thanks to early Christians, evangelists, and so on. But it also came to Arabia via heretic groups, Gnostic groups, Messianic groups, and so on. And this is what makes the parallel very interesting. The Mushrikun, let's talk about them. Let's suppose they were Christians. They were told the idea of salvation. They might have been told this very idea of salvation through different channels. Even if in the end I think they mostly were Christians.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe not Orthodox Christians, but there's something certainly Christian. Well, we know that the Quran contains myths, Jewish myths, Christian myths, children's tales, and Gnostic Gospels, which is it doesn't present an authentic. version of the Bible. It doesn't present an authentic representation of the Bible. It's Gnostic. It's apocryphal. It's mythical. It's so that's odd. So there is a strand of
Um,
Gnosticism that
a
runs through.
medley, a medley,
Yeah,
a soup with many ingredients.
yeah. And I think one difficulty is also what came earlier, what came later, because you're looking at different geographies and different times,
Mhm,
which could be separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries, right, or decades.
mhm.
And then also, what was misunderstanding, what was distortion, what was ignorance, what was deception, and
That's the
what were
thing.
red
And
herrings.
besides, when we have the Quran as the earliest evidence for early Islam, but the thing with the Quran is that it's missing lots of pieces. The Quran had been edited. It's a collection. Some texts were sidelined,
Hmm.
and so we only have within the Quran um, the visions of the one who compiled it ultimately. So I think it was Abdul Malik's vision, which means there have been several steps of selection and choosing the texts that were accurate, but only for according to the state of development of early Islam, in which early Islam was at the time. You see, that's one thing that is very difficult when we study early Islam is that we are looking at something, we are looking at a process that took 1 to 2 centuries, at least for the main concepts of Islam, such as the prophet, the pagan background, the revelation, Mecca, and so on. It took 100 to 200 years for these concepts to emerge and to stabilize, to be coherent enough. And during this time, the Quran evolved, the sources evolved, the conceptions evolved. If you look at Robert Scare's finding and the Inara scholar findings,
Hmm.
they are convinced, for example, that the Umayyads were Christians, that they were not
Hmm.
Muslims, that they were much closer to Christianity than Islam. And we only know about early Islam and the Umayyads. Um, we only know of it and of them thanks to the Abbasids, who rewrote an Islamic history, who were opposed to the Umayyads, who were opposed to everything that came before them, but they had to present them as being both their opponents, so both hateable, but not hateable enough that they would have spoiled the Islamic revelation. You see, there's something very strange with when we study the process of it, and
Hmm.
it's very difficult. There is there are some solid evidence, but there is not much of it, and yeah, it's a work in process. But I think
Yeah.
we have some.
No, I think the more we look at it, the more we can eliminate certain. It's like having a puzzle which has 500 pieces, and you have 2,000 pieces,
Yeah,
and
and not all of
you've
them
got to
are
start.
from the puzzle.
Yes, and not all of them are from the puzzle. Exactly. So
Hmm.
you've got to eliminate 1,500 pieces to be left with, maybe we'll only find 300 pieces, but maybe we'll have a clearer view of the picture. So I think there's only so many logical routes, there's only so many coherent possibilities, and the more we dig into the history, the more we can find clues. And I think even the lies, the misrepresentations, well, they tell us about the agendas of the creators. They tell us where they want us to look, what they not don't want us to look at, what they want to hide, what they want to, what impressions we can learn from that and reverse engineer. I think that's possible, and I think we're getting towards somewhere. And the questions are important, the quality of the questions, and so
Hmm.
Patricia Crone may not have had a complete thesis, but we are here. We can take the torch, and we can start to look and find more. And I mean, I think your thesis is a great thesis that brings a lot of things together. It's not conspiratorial. It's factual. It's historical. It's coherent. And I think it's a great way, a great lens to look at these issues from. So yeah, guys, we should call it a night. It's gone longer than I anticipated, and hopefully you found this helpful. You found it enlightening. You found it it made sense of the information that we have. There's more to go. We've done 13 slides. I've got 30 or 40 right now, and yeah, we've got different scholarly perspectives, and I will be doing summaries of different scholars. We're looking at it from different ways, and I will look at how, for instance, Hoyland dismisses certain of Crone's views, but I don't necessarily agree with Hoyland again. So he takes certain things on board and he rejects others. But I think new evidence, new perspectives, allow us to accept, to keep those things. So yeah, final word to you, Odon. I'll let you end off, and then we'll call it a night.
I like your image of the puzzle and the many pieces. I think we are now at a time when we have the frame of the puzzle,
Right.
and this is quite an achievement, because with this frame we have evidence enough. We have lots of clues that lead us to understand the gist of early Islam. We won't know everything about Muhammad for sure, but we can assert he was not the prophet of Islam, for example. He was someone else. It was something else. We know enough of the Quran to assert that it was not seen as a divine revelation at the beginning. It was something else.
Yeah.
We have found many things, and what we have found is sufficient enough to understand early Islam and Islam, and we will find much more in the future. And like I say, everything will be uncovered.
No, I agree. I think
everything unknown, everything hidden will be uncovered.
It's coming clearer. I believe it's coming clearer, and I've got a couple of conclusions I've drawn from this. I've been working on one puzzle, like I said, why do they hate Paul? And I think I have a specific, clear answer from that, and we will get to that.
That was this topic.
Yeah, that is one thing that I think will come clear here. This answers it. I've spent 3 years on that problem. So guys, thank you very much. I hope this has been enlightening for you and valuable for you. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. Do like, do share, do subscribe, support Odon Lafontaine. Go to The Great Secret of Islam. Follow him on X. Follow me on X. I've got small content, bite size, that I put up. He puts up content. He posted a fantastic image today of the sources of the different Qurans, how the Quran developed. It's insane. The story of one Quran is so mythical. So yeah, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Odon, and all. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Take care and good night.